Planning on feeding your family trash? That awful-looking meal, I've thrown it all away. Hey, are you even listening? I've spilled it all over the floor. The vulgar laughter of Susan came from the smartphone. All 30 portions, ruined. Just thinking about the cleanup makes me sigh. Jake seems to be right next to her, laughing loudly with his mother. Hurry up and buy some meat. And booze too. Susan quickly adds. Susan's demand for me to buy as many snacks and sweets as possible. It's like I'm some kind of servant. I was taken advantage of because of my desire for my son's happiness. But this incident is going to change things significantly. Susan's reign is over. When asked where I am, I told her the truth. What? I'm out shopping right now? What? For what reason am I out shopping? Obviously, to remake the ruined meal. I knew what Susan and the others had done without needing to be contacted. My name is Sally Johnson. 68 years old. I work part-time in a nursing care facility. Before this, I worked at the restaurant my husband owned. It wasn't very busy, but it was a lovely shop loved by the locals. But that place is gone now. My husband died in a car accident. It's been about 10 years since that painful goodbye. There hasn't been much joy in my life since then. There is someone who adds insult to my unfortunate life. Susan, my son Dave's wife. They got married 11 years ago. 1 year before my husband passed away. Looking back, that was probably the peak of my happiness. Susan is strong-willed and neurotic, thinking she's smarter than anyone else. Moreover, everything she does is incredibly rough. She always slams doors and cabinets, making a big noise to intimidate those around her, making my heart race. Honestly, I've felt incompatible with her since she came to visit to announce their engagement. Dave has his clueless moments, you know. I'm always there to support him. Indeed, my Dave has always been a bit unreliable since he was young. He was teased by his 2 younger siblings every day. But he was also incredibly kind and generous, always thinking of the family. If Dave chose her. My late husband and I accepted their marriage with that in mind. Even if she calls my beloved son clueless, I could bear it, thinking of his happiness. Susan, strong-willed and shrewd, sometimes does quite bold things. Every year, during the holiday season, I am painfully reminded of this. Regrettably, Susan rarely comes back home with Dave for a visit. This year, too, something came up last minute. I'll come later, she says, trying to minimize her time at our house. It has become a tradition for Dave to return home first during the holiday season. If she doesn't want to come, she should just say so honestly. I can't help but think that every time, as she deliberately makes up excuses and acts accordingly. It's like she has thick skin or something. Even after my grandson Jake was born, I had quite an unpleasant time because of Susan. Jake was born at the end of April. There was no word from Dave, and since Jake was just born, I optimistically thought maybe we would postpone the visiting. I didn't bother to confirm it specifically. Huh? Didn't we tell you? Maybe you just forgot? Susan's insincere excuse. It's impossible that I would forget such an important thing, since I always make sure to take notes. On the celebration day, Susan's parents also came and gave presents to Jake. I was completely left out. It was infuriating to think that I was deliberately excluded. Thus, about 11 years of continuing this unpleasant rivalry with a mean daughter-in-law. Early last year, there was an incident where Susan exploded like never before. It all started when Dave decided to quit his job at the insurance agency to open a restaurant, saying he has been secretly aspiring to be a chef, unable to forget the taste of his father's cooking and the sight of him working. I want to run a restaurant, even if it's small. I just can't give up my dream. Susan, of course, was vehemently against it and lashed out at him furiously. Don't decide on your own, she screamed at him. You're really stupid. What are you thinking? You don't even know if it'll be profitable. I understand the feeling of wanting to stop your partner's reckless challenges. Men sometimes want to test themselves with such foolish challenges. When my husband started his restaurant, it was the same. Initially, I opposed it. But I never called him stupid like Susan did to Dave. She really is harsh with her words. She speaks without considering how the other person might feel. Eventually, Dave quit his job and began preparing to realize his dream, almost in rebellion against Susan. Then, Susan, becoming defiant, started to openly show her irritation and anger towards Dave and me. After Dave had been attending culinary school for over 6 months, Susan began contacting me directly on my smartphone, always asking for money. Since Dave's income was zero, life was hard, she said. Because of Jake's selfishness, everyday budgeting is tough. Please help us. Even if my daughter-in-law begs for money, I wasn't surprised. It's natural to feel financially insecure in such situations. Even my husband's restaurant didn't make much money at first. Moreover, Dave hasn't even opened his restaurant yet. It's still in the starting phase. As a mother, I feel guilty about my son's behavior and want to help as much as I can. But I'm sure Jake didn't decide to pursue a career as a chef without any thought. I heard he had saved enough for the tuition fees of the culinary school and living expenses while attending school. And Susan herself, as I heard, works part-time at a friend's company. If they're still short on money, maybe it's just her poor budgeting? When I suggested something to that effect, Susan became defensive and snapped back. I'm trying hard, but it's not enough. That's why I'm asking for help. She raised her voice as if demanding that I should understand such things immediately. Apparently, the costs for Jake's tutoring and extracurricular activities are quite high. If that's the case, it can't be helped. But it's important, so I need to discuss it with Dave as well. All right, I'll talk to Dave about it. You better not do that. Because, you know what? If Dave, with his wounded pride, refuses the help, then that's the end of it. Indeed, that's a possibility. Reluctantly, it seems I have no choice but to comply with Susan. In this way, a part of my already small income ended up in my daughter-in-law's pocket. Generally, grandparents find their grandchildren adorable. And they don't mind a bit of expense for them. How I wish I could feel that way. Unfortunately, I couldn't find my grandson adorable at all. Limited to Jake, I even felt hatred. I don't know what Susan has been indoctrinating him with, but Jake regards me as an enemy. For example, during his visits, he would secretly call me "Hey Granny" behind Dave's back. Hey Granny, let me have meat. Dinner should be barbecue. That's final. Got it? No matter how boisterous an 11-year-old may be, such language should not be tolerated. What does he think of me, his grandmother? There's no respect for the elderly at all. Every time Jake spoke rudely to me, I caught him and lectured that this is not how to behave. Manners are necessary even among close family members. You shouldn't call your grandmother "Hey Granny." If you speak rudely, people will dislike you, you know? Do you want to end up with no friends? I even tried to scare him with that. But Jake was completely unaffected. Instead, "Shut up, Granny." He got more defiant. Hate me? So what? All the kids in my class do what I say anyway. It seems Jake has quite an influence at school too. Furthermore, his aggressive behavior extends to chasing around Max, my cat. Because of this, whenever Dave's family comes to visit, Max always disappears. Jake's unpleasant and two-faced nature is very much like Susan's. Like a mother, like a son. It's disheartening to think this is my own grandson. In early December this year, a decisive rift developed between Susan and me. The cause, once again, was money. I was surprised by a sudden call during the day. About the monthly money, can you increase it from $1,000 to $2,000? What? Why? It's for Jake, to enroll him in a better tutoring school. It would be pitiful if he fell behind his friends, right? Susan, I'm sorry, but $2,000 a month is just too much for me. While I could make the payment, doing so would leave me unable to live. Then Susan immediately raised her voice and began to berate me, calling me insincere. Whose son is the reason for all this mess? It's your son, right? It felt like a line had been crossed. Her rough language made that very clear. Susan has stopped showing even the minimum respect towards me. If you need money, borrow it. You have plenty of relatives. Do that much. Indeed, I have many relatives. My late husband had many siblings, about 30 people would gather. But I've never asked my relatives for money, nor have they asked me. Even if shouted at or threatened, I couldn't provide the $2,000. I stood my ground until the end. Then she said, "Fine. Whatever happens, I don't care." And the call ended there. I had only stated what was impossible. Why should I face such backlash for that? The unfairness was too much. I could never have predicted what Susan would do at the end of that year. As usual, only Dave came back home first for the holidays. Since that phone call, there had been no exchange between Susan and me. When I asked Dave, he said Susan seemed normal as always. It seems he still kept our conversation from her, as usual. That means she would probably arrive at our house a day later, as she does every year. I didn't mind. I would just act as I normally do. What else could I do? The incident occurred the day after Dave arrived. Both Dave and I had errands and greetings to attend to, so we were out. It seems that Susan had somehow gotten the house keys from Dave for the visit. Sitting at the bus stop, idly looking at my phone, I saw an unmissable change on the screen. I gave up on returning by bus and decided to do some last-minute shopping at a supermarket that was open at the year-end. Right after entering the store, I received a call from Susan. She was in a very high spirit and without any greeting, she blurted out something rude. "Thinking of feeding garbage to the family? I've disposed of that awful-looking meal you prepared. Hey, are you listening? I've dumped it all over the floor," she said unabashedly. All the food for 30 people, ruined. Just thinking about the cleanup made me sigh. It seemed Jake was right next to her, laughing loudly with his mother. "Hurry up and buy some meat. The best quality meat, you hear?" "Got it, Granny," Susan added, "and booze too. Snacks and sweets, buy all you can," she demanded. After their extravagant prank, they seemed very excited. When asked where I was, I told Susan the truth. "What? I'm out shopping right now? What? Oh, right. Good timing. That's right. I saw everything you did from the start." "Huh?" Susan seemed puzzled. She didn't catch on even when I mentioned I had been watching on my smartphone. I just told her I would explain when I got back and hung up. I also explained the situation to Dave over the phone. I wondered what would become of Susan and Jake after this. Just imagining it made me feel sick. The groceries I bought filled one bag and 2 plastic bags. A significant amount. As I was placing the bags at the entrance, I heard yelling from inside. It was rare, but Dave was raising his voice. I hadn't seen him this angry in years. "Enough is enough. What were you thinking doing something like this? Tell me." The shouting was so loud it made the sliding doors and windows shake. Even Susan, usually so bold, turned pale. Yet, there was still a sharp light in her eyes. In the middle of the room, surrounded by the scattered meal, she yelled, "How many times do I have to tell you? It wasn't me. It was already like this when I arrived." Lies, all lies. She has too many secrets. Defiant, Susan turned her face away from Dave, sulking. "If you don't want to believe me, fine. We can just buy another one, right?" Buy another one? The same meal? That's not a feasible option. I decided to enlighten her, ignorant as she was. This meal was made by Dave. He prepared it for all the relatives to enjoy. Susan was taken aback. Yes, Dave had been working hard on the cooking since early yesterday morning. I had been helping with the preparations the day before, supporting him in various ways. He had put his culinary skills to full use to create the meal for 30 people. I couldn't even begin to imagine the anger Dave felt having his efforts ruined. It was time to tell the whole truth. As I began clearing away the ruined meal, I suggested to Susan that she should come clean. "What? What secrets? Can you not start with that nonsense all of a sudden? What about trying to extract $2,000 a month from me, among other things? Dave's gaze hardened further. It was like pouring fuel on the flames of his anger. Tell me everything, he demanded, and Susan fell silent. I took it upon myself to explain. Since Dave lost his income, Susan has been making me give her $1,000 a month. Dave looked deeply shocked. I was sorry about that. I'm sorry for keeping this from you until now, I added. I think it was wrong of me to have remained silent. I should have been honest with Dave from the beginning. Agreeing to Susan's demands in order to support my son's dream from behind the scenes was the initial mistake. Having my retirement funds taken away and just enduring it, when I think about it again, it's absurd. Susan's irrational behavior clouded my judgment. I told her it was impossible when she asked to increase the assistance to $2,000. Borrow money from relatives if I don't have enough. She even told me such a thing. The reason for the increase was supposedly Jake's tutoring fees. But when Dave heard that, he exploded again. Apparently, Jake wasn't attending any tutoring or lessons at all. Susan had been lying to extract money from me. That's absurd. I had arranged for the living expenses properly. There was no need for her to demand assistance. Where has the money gone? Tell me. Dave pressed. Facing no way out, Susan finally bowed her head. I haven't said anything, but I have debts. I've been using the money to pay them off. Susan had been gambling online without Dave's knowledge. She was in so deep that she had borrowed a significant amount from consumer credit services. I was appalled when I heard. My own money had been used to pay off my daughter-in-law's debts. How infuriating. I decided to reveal everything else I knew. There are more secrets, aren't there? Speak up. Like how you've been bad-mouthing me behind my back. Please stop! Susan, you and Jake have been calling me an old hag together, haven't you? Under Dave's glare, Jake, sitting in a corner, shrank back. I expected them to deny it vehemently, but this time they did not. Perhaps they realized that lame excuses would only make things worse. Good. I decided it was time to let Dave understand all the pain I had been feeling. Jake has been especially terrible. Old hag, give me meat, or give me money. Jake turned even paler. I had no intention of sparing my grandson. Even I, as tolerant as I am, was upset by being called an old hag. I had been made to feel bad and sad for so long. And now, this debacle. Even if they told me to stop, I couldn't. Did Jake think he could save himself by blaming his mother? It's Mom's fault. She called you an old hag, so I thought it was okay for me to say it too. Jake. Stop it. You don't need to say anything more. But Jake's betrayal did not end there. It appeared he knew exactly what his mother had been spending her money on. Under Dave's interrogation, he began to spill one secret after another. Mom has been secretly going to adult places. Places with men. Jake. Stop it. You know what's going to happen, right? Susan had been secretly visiting nightclubs without Dave's knowledge. Moreover, she had even given hush money to her son who had accidentally found out. Jake claimed he received $200 every month as hush money, which was utterly outrageous. How far would this dreadful mother and son go beyond my imagination? Susan's trips to the nightclub were her special treat on the days Dave came home late. Giving money to a grade schooler and neglecting him while she drank. It is beyond normal behavior. And Jake was no better. When asked how he used his allowance, he made a shocking confession. He had been paying his classmates to do his tasks. It seems he was paying his classmates to do his homework and cleaning, setting the price at $2 or $4 per task. The reason Jake had such influence at school was, essentially, because of the excessive allowance he received. What do you think school and your classmates are for? Know some shame, for heaven's sake. Dave's fury was understandable. What parent wouldn't be enraged to learn their child was engaged in such deceitful acts? Reprimanded by his father, Jake collapsed and started crying. It was so miserable. Even Susan, usually so bold, was reduced to tears this time. Yet, despite better judgment, she tried to defend her position until the very end. She insisted that she and Jake were not responsible for the ruined meal.
It was already ruined when we got here. It must have been that cat, always around. It must have knocked it off the table. Please believe me.
What are you even talking about? You called me yourself. Do you remember how terrible the things you said were? Planning on feeding your family trash, wasn't that it?
No, it's not what you think. It was meant to be just a little joke.
I was in no mood for excuses. I showed Susan the screen of my smartphone. It was displaying a video. What was shown was the very room we were in at that moment. It showed our room from a corner, capturing everything. There was Susan and Jake, laughing as they knocked down the meal, all captured by the camera. Of course, including their derogatory comments. Dave looked up at the ceiling in disbelief as he heard Susan and Jake's insults.
What do you think you're doing with the food? And to talk like that to Mom, it's too much even for you. Why? Is this a hidden camera? How is there a video like this?
It's a pet surveillance camera. They're installed all over the house. Every time the eldest son and his wife came home for a visit, our pet cat Max would hide away. To know where he was and what he was doing, I had installed a surveillance camera. While I was out, I happened to view the footage and saw Susan and Jake appear on camera. I was shocked beyond belief to see them start knocking over the meal. After that, I immediately went grocery shopping to allow Dave to prepare a new meal. Then, after receiving a call full of Susan's insults. The thing is, our Max is too well behaved to ever do such terrible things. Blaming a speechless cat for your own actions, Susan, that's really the lowest of the low. Susan, now silent and crestfallen. I suppose she likely thought it would be a fun prank when they arrived at an empty house. As they started, probably the thrill got to them, and they ended up ruining everything. Harassing me by disrespecting food along with her child. You often hear about a difficult daughter-in-law, but ours is quite something. She might even fall into the worst category. Susan was obviously shocked that there was video evidence. She quieted down. She started to apologize, but her excuses were all self-serving, blaming her stress and other factors. I didn't want to hear it, so I told her to help Jake clean up the mess. There was still some time before the relatives arrived. And I had bought as many ingredients as I could. I suggested we head to the kitchen, and Dave followed with a nod. Preparing them takes considerable time. Some ingredients need to be prepared 3 days in advance. Given our time constraints, we decided to opt for quicker, simpler dishes instead of the elaborate traditional fare. We can make mashed potato, radish salad, and perhaps some omelets.
Yeah, I'll try making some special dishes with the other ingredients.
I stood in the kitchen with my son, Dave. It was clear he had been attending culinary school. I was impressed by Dave's efficiency and organization. It reminded me of the old days when I used to stand in the kitchen with my late husband. Dave's culinary skills were significant, as he intended to open his own restaurant. I was confident that the restaurant he would eventually open was bound to be successful. I held this conviction firmly. Meanwhile, Susan and Jake were tidying up. I wondered what Susan thought as she watched the efficient teamwork between Dave and me. It would be good if she could reflect on her outrageous actions and feel ashamed of her own irrelevance. Eventually, the relatives began to arrive in dribs and drabs. My husband's siblings and their families, our second son and his wife and kids, and our daughter and her family. Including us, there were 30 people in total. Making it bustling, as usual. The relatives all quickly noticed that the seats were dirty. They also noticed that the meal, which is usually plentiful, was somewhat scarce this year. When asked about it, I spilled the beans about Susan's wrongdoing. Susan and Jake ruined it. I really don't know what they were thinking. Showing them the video on my smartphone, the relatives were unanimously appalled. All gave Susan disapproving looks.
I am so sorry.
Why don't you explain to everyone why you did this?
Well, that's because...
You hated me so much, didn't you? That's why you wanted to harass me, right? You can be honest now, it's okay.
I'm sorry, really, I am truly sorry.
Susan bowed her head, uncomfortable and remorseful. After that, she repeated her apologies several times. It was a pitiful sight. As for Jake, he was ostracized among the children of the relatives and was on the verge of tears. Children can be cruel sometimes. When it comes to punishing the guilty, they show no mercy. During the gathering, Susan and Jake were isolated in the corner, not even acknowledged by Dave. In mid-February, Dave and Susan divorced. It came out that she had been having an affair with her boss. It seemed to have been going on for a long time, and the boss's wife had multiple pieces of evidence. Following discussions with lawyers, the affair was exposed with irrefutable evidence. Apparently, Susan lined up various excuses, claiming she was led astray or felt lonely. But Susan received no sympathy from Dave. I think it's because her words are not worth listening to. If I were in his shoes, I would have rejected her just the same. I don't want to deal with her. As a result, she took Jake and started a new life elsewhere. Susan once called me, begging to mediate between her and Dave.
Please, I'm begging you. Help me and Jake. Dave won't even answer my calls. This is too much. Please.
You brought this upon yourself by doing unforgivable things. Saying this is too much is rather bold of you. Don't you feel any shame at all? It's futile for a rude, sarcastic, shameless woman who has cheated to suddenly pretend to be meek and humble now. I dismissed her, ending the call and blocking her number. A year has passed since the divorce. Susan still occasionally calls or emails Dave, I've heard. The content is always the same. Expressions of regret for her actions and words expressing a desire to start over. Of course, there are also requests for money. Often, she uses Jake as a ploy to garner sympathy.
Please. Not for me, but help Jake. He's become an outcast at school, he has nowhere to fit in. He used to be so popular.
Indeed. Jake was popular. But that popularity was bought with excessive allowance. As it turns out, in the world of children, the end of money marks the end of friendships, just the same as in the adult world. Burdened with debt and facing severe financial constraints, Susan no longer has the means to give Jake an allowance. It's not entirely wrong to say that Jake's downfall is partly due to Susan's actions. Dave knows this and has hardened his heart to encourage reflection, providing no assistance to them. Currently, Susan is working 2 jobs. As a cleaner and as a part-time employee at a store. She is also engaging in some home-based work, as told by Dave. She has to work tirelessly just to make ends meet, facing a harsh reality where even sleep seems a luxury. As Jake grows older, his needs will increase. But Susan lacks the resources to meet them. Jake might end up having to work right after middle school. Due to his mother's failures. How will he feel about falling into such a situation? He will probably resent his mother, the one who caused all this. After all, he has inherited Susan's volatile temper. In the future, Jake may become unruly, worsening his relationship with his mother, his surroundings, and society. He might join bad company, causing even more trouble for his mother and those close to him. When things turn out that way, Susan might think again, realizing the folly of her actions. What a foolish thing I have done. If only I had left the meal alone. Eventually, she may find herself unable to love her wayward son, leading to an even greater breakdown of the family. Such a painful and regrettable future is easy to imagine. Of course, it would be the result of her own making. 2 years after the divorce, Dave successfully opened his own restaurant. I am now living by assisting him as one of his employees. Running a restaurant is challenging. It's expected that the food is delicious, but what comes after that is crucial. To make the business profitable, it's necessary to utilize social media, develop the staff, and expand the customer base. Fortunately, Dave inherits determination and reputation from his late father. The restaurant, once a diner closed after my husband passed, has been revived by Dave and is thriving. Such rumors have sparked more rumors, and thankfully, the restaurant is bustling with business. We're kept busy every day. I hope we can continue to increase our sales smoothly and bring peace of mind to my late husband in heaven. I often wonder if Dave could have focused on the restaurant if he had remained married to Susan. Probably not. Her negativity and aggression would have worn him down. In that sense, the divorce might have been a blessing in disguise. I owe a strange debt of gratitude to the ruined meal that led to these changes. I plan to support Dave's business as long as I am able to. Not as a showpiece, but with all the dedication I can muster, welcoming every customer with the brightest smile I can give.